What have you made, Charlie, of Postecoglou's start to the season?
I think it's been incredibly impressive by any metric. And obviously throw in the fact that they lost Kane on the eve of the season. Yeah, I think people were kind of thinking this season would be, what they wanted above all was just to have some fun, feel like they've got the excitement back and that they're playing good football and all of that. And obviously they've absolutely had that. But also to have those results in those first 10 games that you mentioned, 8 wins, 2 draws to go top. And yeah, I think sometimes to take a step back and just reflect on how impressive it is that they've managed to stay, not that in the last 10 games. Basically, you've got half the season with a squad that has been decimated by injuries and suspensions. And obviously suspensions is your own doing. You can't whinge about that. But yeah, I think he's done amazingly well. He's completely changed the whole feel of the club, which was, one of the things he was brought in to do. So yeah, he's a great person to cover. He's great to listen to at press conferences. He's got a lot to say on a lot of topics. It's been great, really, really enjoyable and encouraging first, 7 months now for him.
Really keen to know from you, Charlie, how that dynamic is working now as a group when they come together, planning the recruitment behind the scenes. It feels like in the summer, the recruitment was very good, actually. It feels like it's a lot better than it has been, but that dynamic's changed quite a lot, hasn't it, since the summer?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Postecoglou talked about that, the fact that, during the summer, his first transfer window and how important that was, he was operating without a director of football. And that's extremely unusual. Obviously, Paratici was there in that consultancy basis that you mentioned. And, you look at signings like Galini, that was someone who Paratici had looked at before when Antonio Conte was the manager. So he's still an important figure at the club. You look at someone like Dragousin coming from Genoa. That's obviously, a market Paratici knows well. But yeah, Langer's come in as the technical director, and he's got a team working into him. He's very data focused. I mean, essentially how it works, Postecoglou, what's good about Postecoglou is that it may not necessarily just be one target, but he's very clear on what he wants and the kind of players he wants. So he'll have his ideas, even maybe before Langer and his team have gone away and started looking for players. But then once they have done that, they'll kind of reconvene with him and talk about, okay, well, this is what we've picked up. These are the sort of players that we think would work. And Andrew will always have kind of the final say. But so to look at someone like Timo Werner, he was someone who Andrew's liked for a long time, thinks he can kind of fit into his way of playing. And so, yeah, he trusts, then in collaboration with Langer and his team, once they kind of, have their say and do their research, then they'll kind of all agree on those targets. So it does feel, I mean, the key thing is alignment. You hear that word all the time, and you think back to kind of Conte, Paratici era, and as much as people thought they were close, and obviously they had a history of working together, but what they wanted was often quite different. You've got Paratici looking broadly for one of those younger players. Conte wants people who can come and hit the ground running right then, there and then. It doesn't really you need to have people pushing in the same direction. And I think they have that now. And that's why you're seeing it's a pretty clear transfer policy. I mean, I think if you look at the summer and then look again what they're trying to do, I think most people can kind of see what the purpose is. Whereas I always think back to that 2022 summer window and Spurs signed 2 left wing backs. One was Ivan Perisic, 33. One was Destiny Udogie, 19. And you could say, okay, well, they're kind of building for now and the future. But to me, that kind of summarized how kind of poles apart Conte and Paratici were.
One of our own, Richard Cracknell, the great crackers, it's just actually asked you a direct question, so I'm just going to put it up before going to the next one. Can you, Charlie, see us going into the Asia kind of Australian player market, given the links now with Man and Ange and the influence of Son? I've got to be honest, I thought we would have definitely been going in for somebody like a Jota that he'd already had at Celtic, as an example. But it doesn't seem like that we do that. Can you see him going into them sorts of markets?
Yeah, it's funny because I was talking about this with a colleague yesterday because Son's a bit of an outlier. I mean, obviously he's been such a hit, and then Spurs have a big kind of commercial operation in Korea. They toured there, and then last year they went to Thailand and Singapore. So clearly, and then they've been to Asia many times since signing Son. But also Son came from a German club, so it wasn't like they, were kind of scouting in that market necessarily to get him. I do definitely think, I mean, Postecoglou's talked about this before. Obviously, he had great success with Celtic. He signed players from the Asian markets then, and they did very well. And I think there was an assumption that some of those maybe would follow him to Spurs. Obviously, that hasn't happened. But I think it is something they will look into, because Postecoglou is really, really convinced that that's where you can gain an edge on your rivals, is by going to those markets that maybe other people haven't, or look at what Brighton have done with Matoma.
Exactly, Matoma. He springs to mind, doesn't he? And even Enzo,
Yeah.
not Enzo, who's
Endo
Liverpool?
at Liverpool, yeah.
Endo, yeah. There's definitely some unbelievable talent in their markets. And I remember you might have actually asked him the question in one of the presses. It was a few weeks before Christmas, and he talked about that. It might have been the embargo session, forgive me, but he talked about the fact that he's got a lot of that there could, like you just said, alluded to there could be a lot of advantage in their markets, because they tend to snub them because they're not in the big five leagues, or you know what I mean. So you can go and get some gems out there. So maybe it's a summer thing, Charlie, rather than a January thing, right?
Yeah, I definitely think it's one to keep an eye on in the kind of short to medium term, because I think Andrew Postecoglou will be convinced that there are really good players there that have been overlooked. Because look at his whole journey. He always talks about this, the way he was overlooked because of his nationality, and he's so hot on the fact that nationality or background should never be a barrier. So I think he would love to go and find someone from those markets that no one else was looking at, the next Matoma or whoever it is.
Is this a player that you feel can come in and have an actual genuine massive impact on the club and potentially earn himself a summer move, which, to my understanding, having read some of the reports out there, would be a fee of no more than around 15.5 million?
Yeah, I think I can see the logic in it. I mean, I think it's fairly clear they want someone who can come in, hit the ground running, someone who's got Premier League experience, has lived in London before, can play in a number of roles. I just think for what's out there, like, you're not gonna, if you're making a signing in January, that's partly the fact that you're able to get them is probably because things aren't working out so well at their club. Otherwise they wouldn't be allowed to go, or you have to spend a huge amount of money because the club knows that you're desperate. And you think back to Kulusevski, someone who Juve didn't really want. That's why Spurs were able to get him, and the skill is being able to turn those players who, for whatever reason, have kind of fallen out of favour where they are or whatever. And that's what's happened to Werner. But I think, Postecoglou believes there's a really good player there still, and that he can get the best out of him. And I kind of think, worst case scenario, he's not great, but even that, he's still a useful rotational option to have in that front three. Best case scenario, he becomes a regular starter. So he either kind of upgrades Spurs' starting options, which would be great. That would be best case scenario, or he upgrades the squad. Because, think back to that City away game. They started Brian Hill on the left wing. And no disrespect to Brian Hill, but that is not really ideal. Then Brian Hill, it wasn't really working for him. They had to make a change at half time. The only option they had was Højbjerg. That's who they had to bring on for him. Like, that's where their squad, that's where Spurs' options, that's what their options have been this season. So to me, the idea that Werner won't be a big improvement on that is just madness. And it's a loan with an option. If he isn't good enough, just don't make the option permanent. I think for what you can be annoyed that Spurs want or need a stopgap, fine. But accepting that they do, I just don't think there's that much better that's out there than someone of his ability, his experience. He's won the Champions League. His scoring record in the Champions League is pretty decent, actually. So to me, it just feels like a kind of ideal low-risk January signing.
We understand, as all of the outlets are saying now, that we're very, very close on the group add-ons of 4.5 plus Jed Spence, which emerged yesterday. Now we're reading live, actually, as we chat, that Jed Spence is taking some time and wondering whether or not he wants to go to Genoa. So, obviously negotiations are continuing today. To your knowledge, is this now Spurs' number one target this month, based on the fact that Werner's already having a medical? Do you think this will be the next one over the line, Charlie?
Well, he's definitely their main target, and he's someone they've put a lot into. So from this point, and Bayern Munich are interested. That interest is real. So obviously they need to make sure that kind of doesn't scupper it. and they obviously are doing everything they can to get it over the line. I think it's really important that it does. If it does, you're suddenly talking about two important signings. The two of the main signings really done in the first knockings of the window. That is very, very rare. Spurs in January do
all of my care with that, Charlie. To be fair,
they do not sign players. Before I looked into it, it was something mad. Like I think 7 of the last 9 have been on deadline day or that sort of thing in January, and the other 2 were late in the window. So this is kind of unheard of. They could both play against United, but there's still work to be done. It's not done yet. But yeah, fingers crossed on that one because he is the main target.
Can I ask you, Chad, if you don't mind? Go on. You want to come back in, Mecca? You sure?
I was just going to say, like, he's the main target, but like kind of in your knowledge as well, Charlie, he seems to fit the system and the Postecoglou way as well. Obviously, that's probably why he's the main target. But like all of us, we've been ferrying around on YouTube compilations and all that sort of stuff around him. I mean, do you know much about Dragushin, the player? I mean, he's 21, he's 6'3". He's he seems like quite an aggressive type, if you know what I mean, like the way Ange Postecoglou likes to play. I mean, it'd be a good signing for us, right?
Yeah, he's very front-footed. From speaking to people who know him in Romania and in Italy, that's something that comes across. And in some of the clips I've watched, he can be great. He can also be, he's still young, so he's still learning. He can be quite Romero-like, I suppose, and really go smashing into tackles. When it works, it's great. Can leave him a bit exposed. But I think, it's all there for him to be really good in this system. He's good at getting forward as well. He's got a bit of an eye for a goal. I think he looks like a proper defender, but also somebody who likes to step into the opposition half, which is, key to how Ange wants to play. So yeah, it looks like another one that should fit in with the system very nicely.
Gosh, Charlie, before I ask you about a couple more defensive targets that we've seen mentioned to Spurs this window, how comfortable do you feel the club are by how public this transfer is playing out? Now, again, for many out there, I don't want to worry people because it's not my place to do that, although I do seem to do that a lot. Obviously, Bastoni, if we go back a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk around Bastoni. Lee nearly had him on the back of his shirt.
I actually think I ordered Bastoni on the back of my shirt. Not because I thought we'd get him, just to try and get him over the line.
Someone had to try and get this guy over the line.
That might convince him.
Yeah.
Well, I think in an ideal world, all clubs would want none of this stuff to come out. Well, actually, I'll qualify that. They wouldn't want stuff that's unhelpful to them to come out. Obviously, some clubs, it might be useful for them for certain things to be out in the same way that we see agents deciding that it's quite useful for it to be known that, say, another club is interested in them. So it's all a bit of a game. But generally, clubs, they want discretion. They want to, I guess like in any of our own lives, we don't really want what we're doing necessarily to be public knowledge. Obviously, they appreciate that journalists have got to do their job and things are going to come out. And as I say, some things might be helpful for them to come out. I think, generally just have to hope that whatever's going on isn't going to actually affect the deals. And that's the only time where where it's obviously going to be a big issue for them is, if something comes out that could potentially scupper things. Now, in this case, I don't think there's been anything necessarily like that. It has been, there has been a kind of constant update, but it's not been on anything especially sensitive. I mean, I guess the one fear a club might have is if it feels like they're absolutely desperate, and that's why, for instance, what you'll see is clubs really, really don't want injuries necessarily coming out during January, because that weakens your hand. If the selling club knows that, oh, wait a minute, haven't they just lost their right winger to an injury? That's not really ideal. But I don't think, so I think it slightly depends on the nature of the signing. What I do know is that they'll be desperate for it to just be done, and they can, because, as fans or journalists or whatever, we get impatient, but they'll also want this to be done. And in the case of Dragushin, they want it done ideally before Friday's deadline. Then he could be in the squad for the game on Sunday. But they're not the only ones involved. Nowadays with transfers, you've got so many stakeholders, players' agent, the clubs, various intermediaries. It's not always as easy as it seems from the outside when, often to people, understandably, it's just like, how did this take 10 days to reach a point you could have done in one? But there are complications.